Many things in our world use magnets, but have you ever thought about how many? Most of today's speakers use electrodynamic technology which uses magnets to create sound. Like many other scientific breakthroughs, these were not invented in a day. In fact, it took over 62 years for the design to be perfected to what we would now recognize. The speakers we know were created in 1924 by Rice and Kellogg. The design consists of a diaphragm, which vibrates in and out, manipulating the air, which our brains interpret to be sound. What makes the diaphragm vibrate is our magnet. Underneath the diaphragm, there is a permanent magnet and a copper coil called a voice coil. When electricity is fed into the system, the magnet senses pulses from the electricity, which causes the coil to move up and down inside the magnet. And because the coil is attached to the outside of the diaphragm, it pushes and pulls it, which makes the sounds we hear. Microwaves also use magnets, and in fact were created purely by accident. A man named Percy Spencer was a Raytheon engineer, and while he was testing a military-grade magnetron, he reached into his pocket and found his peanut cluster bar had melted. This was important because the caramel in the candy had a very high melting point, which made him wonder what caused the candy to melt. Determined to test his hypothesis, he bought an egg to see what would happen. Excited to test his hypothesis, he slid the egg into the magnetron, and it promptly exploded. Fascinated by what he found, he decided to test it on popcorn, and it worked. It took him a while to come up with a suitable and safe design, but in 1940 he patented the microwave, and the rest is history. The magnetron Percy used was created with two permanent magnets, a copper ring, and a copper rod with a tungsten and thorium coil around it. Tungsten because it withstands heat, and thorium because it's a good source of electrons. Between the copper rod and ring, there's a vacuum, which makes it a closed system. And the copper rod is a cathode, which means it has a negative charge, so the negative electrons boil off. And the copper ring is an anode, which means it has a positive charge and attracts the loose electrons and makes them accelerate. The magnets are key to this particular part. Because the two magnets have their opposite sides facing each other, they create a magnetic field between them, which pulls the loose electrons in an oscillating orbit instead of moving in a straight line as they normally would. As the loose electrons pass the open cavities, they resonate between the sides and emit microwaves. Those microwaves are then directed by a waveguide back into the main compartment where your food is. What really heats food, though, is due to the magnetic field generated by the microradiation. The magnetic field of a microwave moves in a constantly oscillating motion, which means it consistently changes direction. The water molecules have a positive and a negative side, and because of this, they try to follow the oscillating motion of the microradiation, which causes friction, and in turn, your food heats up. So you've learned a lot about magnets. Hopefully next time you try and listen to some music or microwave some food, you'll remember how much more complicated it really is.